Hey everyone, and welcome. Thanks for joining today's webinar on IFR Flying in Canada, part number 2. My name is Adrian Tegler, and I'm a member of ForeFlight's Pilot Support Team. I'm also a Canadian pilot, and I've had the opportunity to fly both as a commercial pilot internationally, as well as for a regional airline here in Canada. All right, so today's topics. We got so many great questions on the first webinar that I did a couple of weeks ago that I wanted to do a second part and address some of those questions and take some of these IFR Flying in Canada topics a little bit farther. So we're going to go through those today. I'm going to start with a little bit of what's new. ForeFlight version 14.0 was just released actually on the day that I did the last webinar, so I'll take a look at a couple of the features in the new version of ForeFlight. And then we'll get into Jeppsen and Nav Canada charts and look at those two. We'll talk about Inset terminal area charts and how to view those in ForeFlight. And then we'll look at uncontrolled airports and the IFR procedures associated with those. We'll talk about alternate airports and take this a little bit further and in more detail than the first webinar, and just look at the procedures associated with choosing your alternate airport for your IFR flight. And then we'll look at some approach types. We'll talk about in-flight route changes and how to deal with those, and then we'll end with some Q&A. All right, so before we begin, you can ask questions throughout the webinar via the GoToWebinar message panel, and we'll respond to as many of those questions as we can during the presentation, and we'll also get to more questions at the Q&A at the end. If you do have any audio problems, we recommend joining from a computer and not from a mobile device. This session is also being recorded and will be accessible at foreflight.com/webinars. All right, so what's new? Well, first of all, we have new aeronautical map filters, and these allow you to customize and declutter ForeFlight's aeronautical map with new quick toggles for airways, nav aids, and waypoints. And these were previously combined into a single toggle. So now you can find the best combination of these elements to suit your own flying, such as hiding airways and waypoints on VFR flights or hiding nav aids for RNAV-based routes and more. All right, so you can quickly find US takeoff and alternate minimums now. And if you do plan any IFR flights to the US this year, ForeFlight now automatically opens the takeoff and alternate minimums documents to the correct page for any US airport when you view them via the airports page and the procedures list. All right, so let's look at Jeppsen and Nav Canada charts and procedures. And in my previous webinar, I was displaying Jeppsen procedures as we were working through our IFR flight, and I explained that this is because these procedures are what I'm familiar with. In ForeFlight, you have two different options for procedures. So when you purchase a ForeFlight Canada subscription, that subscription is going to include the Nav Canada charts and procedures, so the government charts for Canada. Similarly, if you were to purchase a ForeFlight USA subscription, that would come with the FAA, so the government charts and procedures with the US region. So with any ForeFlight subscription that you purchase, you also have the option to purchase additional Jeppsen coverage. And depending on the region that you purchase, that will include Jeppsen charts and procedures for that region. So for example, you could have a ForeFlight Canada subscription with additional Jeppsen Canada coverage, and then you would have both the Nav Canada charts and procedures and the Jeppsen charts and procedures for Canada. So let's take a look at some of those just to see some of the differences and similarities. So on the left, we've got a Jeppsen airport diagram for Timmins, and then on the right, the Nav Canada aerodrome chart for Timmins. So a lot of similarities here. You can see the same information. It's just presented in a different format. We have a Jeppsen approach plate for Timmins, the same runway. This is the RNAV runway 03, and the Nav Canada approach, same for the RNAV runway 03 at Timmins. And again, you can see that the same information is on both procedures. It often comes down to preference and what pilots are used to. In my time flying in the airline, I got used to using Jeppsen charts because airlines use Jeppsen charts because those are the charts that are available globally. So it's kind of one format that's consistent between, multiple countries and different areas. So Jepsen is the standard for the airline, and so I got used to using Jepsen charts, and that's what I'm familiar with now. So they're my go-to. I think that Nav Canada charts and procedures are great, and if you're used to using those, I say continue using those, and they're fantastic. The key is use what you're familiar with, and just make sure you're comfortable with either version and that style of chart, and know where to access all the information. All right, here's another comparison. So we've got a Jepsen instrument arrival into Ottawa, and the Nav Canada equivalent of the same arrival. It's the Capital 5 into Ottawa. Again, everything is there on either one that you choose to use. One note for Nav Canada instrument arrivals and departures, so stars and SIDS, is that they're not drawn to scale. So that means that we can't show your position overlaid on the arrival or the departure. It also means that we can't place that SID or the star on the map because we're not able to georeference it because it's not to scale. If we did it wouldn't work correctly. It wouldn't show your position correctly. Whereas the Jepsen SIDs and stars, they are drawn to scale, so you can see your position on the majority of them, and they can be placed on the map, which can be useful. If in the future Nav Canada does start producing the SIDs and stars to scale, then we can work to georeference those, and they'll be available. So that's something I'm not sure what Nav Canada's plans are for that, but if they do draw those to scale in the future, then we can have them georeferenced. All right, so here is a Jepsen IFR low chart and the equivalent, the Nav Canada IFR low chart. And speaking of charts, ForeFlight's aeronautical chart is a great resource, and it's available with all standard ForeFlight subscriptions. So from Basic Plus to Pro Plus to Performance Plus, you can use the aeronautical chart, and it's all based on Jepsen data. So it's a data-driven chart, which is great because it means it's always going to orient correctly no matter which way you're flying on the map. So if you like to fly in track up and you're flying south, all the labels are going to be oriented correctly. Whereas if you're using, say, the Canadian IFR low chart, which is based on, it's a digital version of the paper chart. So when you're flying south and in track up, it's going to look like it's upside down. But the nice thing about the aeronautical chart is you can actually use it in conjunction with other charts. So on the right, you can see that the aeronautical chart and the IFR low chart are being used, and they work well together. So you can use the aeronautical chart on its own, and it's a great resource of information. You can also overlay it with any other chart that you're using. Since we're on the topic of charts, let's take a quick look at Inset terminal charts. So here's a view of the IFR low chart in the Ottawa area, and you can see that there's a faint gray dashed line that makes a square around the Ottawa terminal area. Here, I'll highlight it there. So that's the area, and you can see if you look in the top left corner, it says see the Ottawa terminal chart. So this is the Inset Ottawa terminal chart, and you can view that in ForeFlight in a few different ways. So first of all, if you tap, depending on your settings, if you tap on that area, ForeFlight's going to bring that chart forward. So there you go. You can see that's the Inset terminal chart now brought forward into view, and if you were to then tap again, it would hide it. So let's take a look at those settings and how they work. So you can access the map settings directly on the maps page. You tap on the little gear button at the top there, and it brings down the map settings. Then you want to look all the way down and tap on the map touch action. So map touch action has 3 different settings. So the first one, no action. That means that when you tap on the map, there's going to be no direct action related to that tap. So what that'll mean, if you have that set, if you tap on this terminal chart, it's not going to bring it forward. But if you zoom in and zoom out, it will show and hide the terminal chart based on zooming. So there's no action based on tapping or touching on the map, but there is based on zooming. So that's the first setting. The next one that I have selected here is the bring chart to front. So this means that when you tap on the chart, it's going to bring, literally, like it says, it's going to bring the other chart or any charts that are below, it's going to bring them forward. And if you continue tapping, it's going to continue to cycle that process and bring the next chart forward and then continue in that way. So this can be useful if you wanted to, say, zoom in on this Ottawa area, and you didn't want the terminal chart to come into view. And if you had the map touch action set to no action, it's going to automatically bring it forward. But if you had bring chart to front selected, you could zoom in, and if it did bring it forward, you could tap and it's going to cycle the IFR chart forward. And so you could see that. In other words, it allows you to manually tap to select which chart is in view. And then the final setting, bring chart to front with legends, that's very similar to bring chart to front, but it's as you tap to bring a chart forward, it's going to show the chart as well as all the collars that are part of the side, the sides of the chart, just like if you're looking at the paper chart. So you can experiment with those three options and see what works best for you and what your preference is. This is a great feature because it really allows ForeFlight to display all the available information. Since these charts are digital versions of the paper charts that Nav Canada publishes, there's actually a number of areas where you'll have multiple charts that overlap each other, or you'll have situations like this where there's an inset terminal chart. And this is kind of a tile system where you can bring charts forward, allows you to basically manually select whatever chart you want to view in these areas where you have multiple charts overlapping or inset terminal charts. All right, so here's an example of when I have no touch action selected, and you can just zoom in and it'll show the terminal chart. You zoom out and it goes back to just the standard IFR low chart. All right, let's take a look at uncontrolled airports. We got a great question in the last webinar about IFR procedures that are related to uncontrolled airports. And so I wanted to address that in part 2 here. So let's take a look at a flight today from Timmins to Montreal. And these are both uncontrolled airports. So we'll look at some of the procedures that are related to flying, departing and arriving at uncontrolled airports. All right, so taking a look at Timmins and some departure considerations. So first, we always want to consider the runway level of service. This is an uncontrolled airport, so it has MF procedures. There's no separation provided between IFR and VFR traffic. And there's limited radar coverage from Toronto Centre. So runway level of service at uncontrolled airports in regards to departures. The lowest visibility of all of the following must be at or above the runway level of service. So 1, the reported ground visibility for the airport. So that could be in the METAR or SPECI. Any reported RVR, so even if it's for a different runway that you're not planning to use. And 3, the pilot observed visibility. So if we take a look at the airport diagram on the right, and we can see that the runway level of service for all the runways is 1/2 mile. And so if we take a look at a METAR for Timmins, winds are 220-34, gusting 41. That's terrible. 1/4 mile vis, heavy snow, blowing snow, vertical visibility 1100, -29. Wow, that's actually a real METAR, and I would not want to be flying, but we can't anyway. So this is, you can see the runway level service is 1/2 mile, and we've got a 1/4 mile vis here. So we can't taxi, we can't depart with this weather. All right, so what if we had a SPECI within our time frame here that said Timmins and 3/4 mile vis, so light snow showers, vertical visibility 300. That's going to work, right? Because that's above the runway level of service. So if a METAR or SPECI is not reported, the observed visibility from the flight service station or the air traffic service is then used, along with any reported RVR and pilot observed visibility. And then if there's no official report, then the pilot will determine if the visibility meets the level of service. So pilots are responsible for ensuring they are compliant with the reduced visibility operations, low visibility operation rules at uncontrolled airports, since FSS will not stop pilots from taxiing, even if the visibility is too low for aircraft moving at the airport. So whereas we talked about in the first webinar, in a controlled or at a controlled airport, the tower is not going to let you taxi if the visibility is below the level of service. But at an uncontrolled airport like this, departing from Timmins, it's the pilot's responsibility to make sure that they're not taxiing when the visibility is below the minimums. In the absence of a published visibility for a particular runway, a pilot may depart IFR by using a takeoff visibility that will allow avoidance of obstacles on departure. So in no case should the takeoff visibility be less than half a mile. So sometimes you'll see an airport where they don't actually publish the runway level of service or minimum visibility. So the default or the minimum in those cases is a half mile. So you can't go below that. All right, so here's an example of a departure decision flow that you could use departing from an uncontrolled airport. So first of all, you're going to determine the runway level of service, just like we just did. And then visibility. So you're going to ask, is the visibility greater than or equal to the runway level of service? If no, of course, taxi is prohibited. If yes, go ahead and taxi to the runway. Okay, that brings us to our takeoff decision making. So you're going to ask again, is the visibility still greater than or equal to the runway level of service? Right? If yes, is the visibility greater than or equal to the takeoff minimums? Those are likely going to be the same. And if yes, take off. If the visibility is not greater than the runway level of service, then you can ask the question, well, is there another runway with the required level of service? And then if that's a no, then taxi or the takeoff is prohibited. If yes, then you can technically taxi to another runway. And that brings you back to asking, is the visibility then greater than or equal to takeoff minimums for that new runway? And if yes, you can go ahead and take off. But if no, of course, then takeoff is prohibited. All right, and just remember that at non-towered airports, the lowest of all the reported RVR and visibility must be considered. Other considerations. So of course we want to consider the freezing level, and you can use the airports page in ForeFlight or the maps page and tap on the weather and the winds tab, and you can see a list of altitudes and respective temperatures and winds. And this allows you to quickly determine, well, on the flight that I'm doing today, am I going to be encountering clouds with temperatures that are below zero? So in this case, it's very clear the temperature is very cold today. Any clouds that I encounter are going to be below zero, which means that I'm going to pick up icing. So I need to make sure that my aircraft is equipped to have sufficient anti-icing or de-icing equipment on board to handle that. Runway contamination. So you can find information regarding runway contamination on the airports page or on the maps page, and that's under the NOTAM tab for the airport. So here you can see that ForeFlight's displaying the runway surface condition report for Timmins, 666 dry. So everything is looking good today. No runway contamination. And again, this information is in the same place that it's published by Nav Canada. So Nav Canada publishes these NOTAMs, and ForeFlight displays the RSC NOTAMs via the NOTAM tab that you can access on the airports page or on the maps page. You can also find more information on runway surface condition and the CRFI equivalent, the runway friction index equivalent, and that's in the CFS. And you can view the full CFS document on the documents page in ForeFlight under the Nav Canada drive. Crosswind and tailwind limitations. And just keep in mind, if you do have a CRFI for the runway that you're departing from, you also want to look at the specific crosswind limits for CRFI chart. So there's a separate set of crosswind limitations that apply to when you're taking off with a CRFI. And that's, again, that's in the CFS on the documents page in ForeFlight. All right, you want to think about if you need a takeoff alternate. We looked at this in the first part of our webinar series. All right, so let's get into some route planning. So the route advisor shows recommended recently cleared ATC routes, and airway routes between your planned departure and destination. So this is a great way to plan IFR routing. And we can see here on the right, we've got our recommended route, YTS resin, our ATC cleared route. It's just a direct route between Timmins and Montreal. And then there's even an airway route if we wanted to fly all airways. And for reference, ForeFlight's recommended route feature is part of Performance Plus, and it gives you the best route based on your detailed aircraft performance profile and your time, fuel savings, while also accounting for preferred routes, recently cleared ATC routes, and how frequently a route is assigned. So ForeFlight evaluates all these available route options and picks a route that provides the best balance between time, fuel savings, likelihood of being cleared as filed by air traffic control. And if no previously cleared routes are available for the airport, ForeFlight will generate a wind and temperature optimized route based on your selected aircraft and the performance profile. Air traffic control cleared routes and airway routes are available with all ForeFlight subscriptions. So if you don't see the recommended route, that's why it's a Performance Plus feature, but it's great to have because it kind of looks at all factors and gives you a route. In this case, recently cleared ATC route direct, it might sound tempting. I could get a direct route. Keep in mind, some of these cleared routes may be for medevac traffic. So this might have been a medevac flight out of Timmins. And that's why it's direct. You could try for that, but you may or may not get it. All right, you can also tap on the route constraints button. So that's the button at the top right corner of the route advisor, and you can specify some of your own route constraints. So here, I'm going to set a maximum altitude of 10,000 feet. Say maybe I don't have oxygen on board, or maybe I don't want to use oxygen and go above 10, so I'll set that as a route constraint. So maximum altitude is going to be 10,000 feet, minimum altitude, I don't want to go below 5,000, so I'll put that in. You can also, add anything like specific waypoints you want to include along your route, or waypoints you want to avoid. So you can add those constraints there and then tap the back button. So once you're happy with your route and you have all the points set and constraints as you like them, I like to move over to the profile view. Now this is such a powerful feature to view your planned route in a side profile and then add information to that. So like airspace here, for example, you can use the airspace layer to familiarize yourself with the airspace along your route. And you can tap on that airspace, you can zoom in, you can really dig into it to find out what you're going to encounter. You can also use the clouds layer. So this is great for when you're flying IFR. You can get a sense of what are the forecasted clouds for the time of my departure and for the time of my flight. And here today we can see that it looks like we might climb through a little bit of cloud as we go out of Timmins, and we might expect a bit of cloud at top of descent for Montreal, but predominantly clear. Continuing on, I like to look at the icing layer as well, and you can see this is quite similar to the cloud layer because it's so cold today. Usually where there's clouds, there's going to be some forecasted icing as well. So same kind of thing. We can expect a little bit of icing as we climb out of Timmins, and then some icing at top of descent there into to Montreal as well. But predominantly clear, which is great because it's not nice to have my whole flight in icing conditions. My aircraft is certified for known icing, so I can fly it in these conditions. But I don't, if I can avoid flying in icing, then of course that I will. And you don't want to overwhelm the system depending on how much icing there is. But you can see with the lighter color blue here that this is mostly light icing that's forecasted. So what is this area? We had a great question in my first webinar regarding this in the profile view. Now this is the area that you can see on the far right, just by our destination airport, Montreal, and it's the red dashed kind of lines that you can see there. So let's zoom in to get a better look. So if I pinch zoom within the profile view, just like you would on the map, you can zoom right in so I can see the route, scroll along and get a better look at kind of what's going on here. So I can also tap hold and drag within the profile view, just like this. It's going to show the route, any towers, my clearance from those, And as I get closer to the airport, I can see the little red dot now, and it's showing that there's a potential strike at that location. So this is good information, and that potential strike in that area is related to the red dashed line. So those red dashed lines are going to indicate an area that's after, right around and after that potential strike. So if you see that, it's indicating that, hey, ForeFlight's calculating there could be a strike here, and the red dashed lines is everything after that. So a couple considerations. First of all, this profile is based on my aircraft performance information. So the Cirrus SR-22 that I'm using here is set up with a descent rate of 500 feet per minute. So that's a somewhat shallow descent rate, and you can see that indicated in the route line. So it's kind of a shallow descent there, which of course could be more conducive to conflicting with terrain. You know, a steeper descent, obviously you're going to be higher for longer, and you're going to avoid more terrain. So that's part of the reason why we're seeing that here. The other part is because my route right now is coming directly, mostly from the west, right to the airport, which is not realistic. It's not, my current routing is not in line with a final approach for either runway. It's basically coming from the side. So that's also going to cause a conflict with the little bit of terrain that's in the area. Of course, in real life, I'm not going to approach the airport in this way. I'm going to fly, either if it was VFR, you're going to fly a circuit for it, or if it's IFR, I'm going to fly the approach and come in on runway centerline. So I'm never going to, unless I'm flying a helicopter, which I'm not in this case, I'm never going to approach the airport like the routing is set up currently. So that's another consideration. And if you want to, you can rubber band your route and play around with it a little bit to show a more realistic approach and final there. But it's good to know that if I was to approach from the west like this with a 500 foot per minute descent rate, terrain could be a bit of an issue. So that's what that's showing. Another important thing to note is that these first strike warnings, they're not shown within 1 nautical mile of the departure or destination airports. So in this case, I think we're just outside of that. Also, the clearance warning, so you get warning, you can see at the top there's a yellow clearance, 210 feet warning. These ones are not shown within 5 nautical miles around the departure or destination airports. And this is just to help with these issues where you might have a route that is planned, like this, and it's just to filter and not show this incorrect information, because in reality, of course, you're going to be flying runway centerline, or you're going to be flying the approach, and it helps. All right, another consideration here is our Crosstrack, so and our route corridor. So you can see at the top right, we currently have a route corridor set of 4 nautical miles. So that means 2 nautical miles on either side of the route. So if you tap on that setting there, you can actually specify your corridor width. So if you want, and this is in terms of, how far on either side of your route is ForeFlight looking for obstacles and terrain. So if you want to make that more conservative, you can make that higher. ForeFlight's going to look, in this case, I've got it at 4 nautical miles. So ForeFlight's looking 2 nautical miles on either side of that route for any possible conflicts with terrain or obstacles or towers or anything like that. You can change that to be, as low as a half a nautical mile and as high as 20 nautical miles, depending on your preference. And that also changes the display of your first strike, potential first strike or clearance issues along your route. All right, so now that we've reviewed our route in the profile view, let's move over to the plates page. And we can use this Add Flight Binder button to quickly add all the information that we planned on the maps page. So ForeFlight will automatically add the procedures for the flight in an organized format. So I'll tap on Add Flight Binder. I'm going to select from Maps because I planned the flight on the Maps page. And that's going to then load all the procedures that are associated with the flight, and then I can tap on the airport, departure, approach, or miscellaneous buttons to change or add procedures as needed. So I just go along, this is in chronological order, so it starts with our departure airport Timmins, goes all the way down to Montreal, which is our arrival airport. And then you can see here, so if I tap the approach button, I may not know yet what approach I'm going to do. And I can see that there's two primary approaches, the RNAV runway 02 and the RNAV for runway 20. So I can select both of those and they'll just have them available there for quick access because I don't know which one that I'm going to get. So that's the option. You can also see that the departure and the arrival buttons, they're faded out. So they're not highlighted because there's no departure and no arrival procedures for the airport. All right, so you want to review all the relevant information for the flight, of course. And since there's no published departure or arrival, you want to refer to the takeoff and departure procedures on the aerodrome chart. Okay, so you can see that you can't select the departure there because there's none available. And so let's look at some of the departure considerations. So for an IFR departure, first of all, minimum visibility for takeoff, half mile. You need to cross at least 35 feet above the departure end of the runway. Climb on runway heading to 400 feet above airport elevation before turning. And maintain a climb gradient of at least 200 feet per nautical mile throughout the climb to the minimum altitude for en route operations. All right, so let's go ahead now that we've taken a look at all the procedures for the flight and we've planned the route. So let's send this over to the flights page. So I'm back on the maps page. I'm going to tap the send to button and then I'm going to select flights. And that's going to send all my planning over to the flights page. And on the flights page, I can then take a look at the detailed nav log for the flight. I can get a briefing and review all the information and all the NOTAMs that are in the briefing. I can also tap on the alternate button or the alternate field that's within the flights page to select an alternate for the flight. So unless authorized by the minister, no pilot in command shall operate an aircraft in IFR flight unless the IFR flight plan or itinerary includes an alternate aerodrome that meets the alternate weather minimums. All right, so we need to have an alternate for our flight. So the alternate advisor gives a list of suggested possible alternate airports based on a number of criteria. First is time and fuel requirements to reach the alternate, forecasted weather conditions, the available approach procedures, whether you have previously selected that airport as an alternate on flights with the same destination. And as always, these are great recommendations in the alternate advisor or suggestions to help you decide, but you want to refer to the alternate weather minima requirements in the CapGen. These are just suggestions. We still have to make those pilot decisions to determine the correct and legal alternate. All right, so let's look at some examples. So CSD4, so Mont Laurier, is it a suitable alternate? We can see here on the airports page under procedures and approach that there's two available approaches, an RNAV Yankee for runway 26 and an RNAV Zulu for runway 26. Okay, so we have one consideration here is that since we've got these two RNAV approach, these GNSS, these satellite-based approaches here at Mont Laurier, we also only have RNAV satellite-based approaches at our planned destination, Montreal, CYFJ. So that means that the destination and alternate actually have to be separated by 100 nautical miles. So you can see here, this is in the CapGen, and you can access the CapGen in ForeFlight via the Nav Canada drive on the documents page. And here it says, so where a satellite-based approach is planned at both the destination and the alternate, the aerodromes are separated by a minimum of, and so for all aerodromes that are located anywhere else in Canada, that's below that line. So anything below 56 degrees north. So the majority of Canada, the alternate and the destination need to be 100 nautical miles apart. So CSD4 and CYFJ, Mont Tremblant and Mont Laurier, are only 34 nautical miles apart. So that's not going to work for us today. And this is an important rule to remember when your destination airport only has GNSS approaches. So let's say our destination airport had both an ILS and RNAV approaches. So the 100 nautical mile separation is not required in this case. Would CYND Gatineau be a suitable alternate? Let's look at another airport here, Gatineau, and see if it would be a suitable alternate. So in this case, Gatineau has 2 RNAV approaches and a VOR approach. So we know that credit may be taken for satellite-based approaches, RNAV approaches, provided that the cap conditions are met. However, no credit may be taken for LPV or LP lines of minima. So we can't use the LPV minima in this case. However, credit may be taken for LNAV VNAV lines of minima when the aircraft is certified for barometric LNAV VNAV, and credit may be taken for LNAV lines of minima. So we do have an LNAV line of minima, so weather at CYND must be above the LNAV minimums. So here we have the caption open with the alternate weather minima requirements. And we know in this case, we can only take credit for LNAV minima. And LNAV is not considered to be a precision approach. So we use the 802 alternate weather minima that refer to a non-precision only available. Now let's take a look at this TAF. So we'll say that this is the TAF for the arrival time that would apply here. And the winds are 090 at 10 knots, 1.5 statute miles, light snow, overcast 800. Is this going to be a suitable alternate if this was the TAF at the arrival time? No, right? Because we're looking for 802. In this TAF, we have our 800, but we don't have the 2 miles visibility because it's saying it's going to be 1.5 statute miles. So that wouldn't be a suitable alternate. What if this was the TAF? So winds are 090 at 10, 2 miles visibility, light snow, overcast 900, right? And this does work because we do meet the minimums at 802. We've got overcast 900 and 2 miles. All right, so bonus question now. So the exact same scenario, same approach, and we're still using the 802 alternate weather minima. What if the TAF was the following? So winds 090 at 10, 1.5 statute miles, light snow, overcast 900 feet. I'll give everybody a second to see that. Shout the answer at the screen so I can hear it. And if anybody said yes, that's correct. All right, so if we look down further on the page here at the alternate weather minima in the caption, you can see that it says if the standard is applicable, then the following minima apply. So the standard of 802 is applicable in this case to our approach. And if so that applies. So then we can also use this scale. So we can say 900 and 1.5. So if it's a little bit higher ceiling, we can go a little bit lower on the visibility. So in this case, overcast at 900, we could go down to 1.5 statute miles visibility. So this would work for our alternate weather. It would meet the requirements for the alternate weather minima. All right, so continuing on, I'm going to choose Montreal in this case because, again, our destination airport, Montreal, only has the GNSS approaches, only satellite-based approaches. So I can't choose another airport that only has the satellite-based approaches unless it's 100 nautical miles away. So in this case, I'm going to use Montreal because it has a number of factors that make it a good alternate. So first of all, it has a number of different approaches. So ILS, RNAV, so we don't have to worry about that 100 nautical mile requirement. And you can see in the alternate advisor, it actually shows you the approach types that are available. So that's kind of handy if you want to look at those and identify that quickly. It's got ILS, localizer, RNAV approaches as well. Multiple separate runways. So that's also another good aspect of this, using this as an alternate. And of course, it's got good weather. So I checked the weather for Montreal. It's looking really good. It's going to be a good alternate today. All right, so let's take a look on the topic of approaches and look at a couple of different approach types. All right, so I want to look specifically at LPV versus ILS. So here we have an example of an RNAV approach into Montreal for runway 24 left and an ILS for runway 24 left. So both into Montreal, both for the same runway, One is an RNAV with LPV minimums, and the other one is an ILS with ILS minimums. So let's just take a look at the differences between the two and the similarities. So here we go on the left, zoomed in kind of on the minimums. So the LPV approach and the ILS here both have the same 200-foot AGL minimums. You can see that. Right, they also both have and provide geometric vertical guidance. And taking this further, approaches with vertical guidance can be broken down to those that provide geometric vertical guidance and those that provide barometric vertical guidance. So approaches with geometric vertical guidance include ILS, LPV, or L/V. Approaches with barometric vertical guidance include RNP, LNAV VNAV, or LNAV. Now, geometric vertical guidance, it maintains a constant angle relative to the runway, regardless of altimeter errors due to non-ISO temperatures, mountain wave effect, or altimeter setting errors. Whereas barometric vertical guidance will either shallow or steepen the approach angle relative to the runway due to altimeter errors like non-ISO temperatures, mountain wave effect, or altimeter setting errors. And this information is from an article titled The Vertical Challenge, which is published by Transport Canada. And I recommend searching for this article online if you'd like to learn more detail about these different types of approaches. Also, when it comes to specific or really technical approach questions, I always recommend referring to the CARS, to the official definitions listed in the AIM, and the information in the CapGen. And there's a great quote in this article, The Vertical Challenge, which is written by Anthony McKay, the Director of Operational Safety at Nav Canada. And Anthony says, when I started flying in 1986, the definition pertaining to precision and non-precision approaches was very simple. Precision was ILS, and everything else was non-precision. Today, with the advent of RNAV, the precision/non-precision line is very blurry. All right, so let's take a look at some IFR fuel requirements for propeller-driven aircraft. So the required fuel for IFR flight with an alternate is sufficient fuel to fly to and execute an approach and a missed approach at the destination aerodrome, as well as fuel to fly to and land at the alternate, and then to fly for a period of an additional 45 minutes. And ForeFlight's flights page provides a great breakdown of this information. Now, this is part of ForeFlight Performance Plus, where you get this detailed fuel breakdown. And you can see here on the left that there's a flight fuel section, and that includes your taxi fuel and your fuel to destination, as well as a fuel at landing section, which includes your alternate fuel, your reserve fuel, and extra fuel. So let's take a look at that in a little bit more detail. So here we are now zoomed in on the flights page in the fuel section, and it starts with the fuel policy. So this is where you can select a fuel policy for your flight, and this could be extra fuel, it could be a minimum fuel policy, it could be a maximum fuel policy. There's a number of different options you can choose to start with here, or a fully manual fuel policy is an option as well. So the next line here is our starting fuel. So there's quick buttons that you can tap for min fuel, max fuel if you want to do that that way. And then that gets into our flight fuel. So this is the fuel for our flight, and that includes our fuel for our taxi based on our aircraft performance profile, your taxi fuel, your fuel to destination. Now this is the calculation of the fuel usage based on your aircraft performance for the climb, the cruise, and the descent profile, taking into account, of course, the temperatures and the winds and the weather for the time frame of your flight. And then fuel at landing, and the breakdown of that is your alternate fuel. So that's the fuel required to fly from your destination to your alternate, and also includes approach as well. And reserve fuel. So this is where the 45-minute additional fuel comes in. So you can set this based on a policy like this, 45 minutes, or you can manually enter the exact gallons that you know for your aircraft that would equate to 45 minutes of flying time. So that's where you enter your reserve fuel. And then there's even an extra fuel line where you can just enter any extra buffer that you want to personally add. All right, so these calculations are then indicated in the detailed nav log that you access through the flights page. And so here you can see we've got the main nav log for our flight to Montreal, and then there's a separate section in nav log for our alternate in case we do need to fly to our alternate. So let's zoom in on that. And here you can see specific legs. So departing from Montreal Airport, and then flying to our alternate Montreal, and it even includes these generic approach legs. So ForeFlight calculates those additional approach legs into that flight to your alternate so that it's more accurate. It's not just a direct flight. It's actually taking into account a couple of generic legs that would look similar to what you would fly on an approach. So that provides a little bit more accuracy in terms of fuel calculations than a direct flight would be to your alternate, because realistically you're not going to be flying a direct flight to your alternate. You're going to fly an approach at your alternate. All right, so once we have all of our flight set, we're going to file our flight plan. So you can do that on the flights page by tapping proceed to file, and you'll get the ICAO filing form with the information. And when you're ready, you can tap on file, and you're going to get a flight plan filed message, and ForeFlight will send that directly to Nav Canada. Also, after you file your flight plan, you'll receive 2 notifications by email and push notification. The email is going to include a summary of your flight plan filing with the weather information and a link to download and print all that information if you'd like to. And if there are any issues with your flight plan, or if Nav Canada doesn't receive it, ForeFlight is always going to provide you that information. So you're either going to see that your flight plan's been acknowledged by Nav Canada, or if they don't acknowledge it, you're going to get that. So you'll get the information regarding what's going on with your flight plan. All right, so your flight plan's been filed, and now you're at the aircraft and you're getting close to departure. So you're going to go through your checklists, of course. You're going to pick up your clearance, and the scratch pad can be a great way to write down your clearance in ForeFlight. So here's our clearance going to Montreal. And then once you're ready for departure, I like to zoom in on the, either if it's an instrument departure, and in this case it's the airport diagram with the departure information. So for departing on runway 21, there's the line that says no left turn until reaching 2,000 feet before proceeding on course. So I've got that highlighted for reference. I wrote in the runway heading as well. So I'm going to fly that 211 degree heading on departure. Again, this is personal preference. Different pilots may like to have the map up or something different up, but I like to have that departure information just front and center, so I can reference it as I'm departing the airport. All right, so we've departed and we've done our en route portion, and now we're getting ready to arrive into Montreal Airport, which the official airport name is Le Macasa. So if you see that on the plate, that's what it is. Le Macasa, or Montreal is the name for this airport. And let's talk about some arrival considerations. So again, just like with departure, runway level of service, that it's an uncontrolled airport. They have a unicom. Okay, and it says that pilots shall establish communication with the FSS ATC or Unicom no later than 5 minutes prior to the estimated time of commencing the approach procedure. So this is good to consider because we'll be likely talking to Toronto or Montreal Center, and we need to make sure that we contact the Unicom at Montreal at least 5 minutes prior to the estimated time of commencing the approach. So not the estimated time of arrival, but the estimated time of starting that approach. So that's a consideration. All right, so let's take a look at the runway level of service at Montreal. So we can see here that the level of service depends on your aircraft category. So from the AIM, we can reference, I'm in the Cirrus, my maneuvering speed and approach speed is going to be just under 90 knots. So I'm going to go with category A aircraft. And if we see category A, runway level of service is 1 mile. All right, so another consideration, we talked about this in the first webinar, is the temperature at your destination less than or equal to 0 degrees Celsius? Okay, and when you talk to Montreal Unicom, they provide some weather information. They're actually certified to do that, so that's helpful. So you can get that information that way. If not, you may have got the weather information before you departed, and packed all your flight information, so you can still reference the temperature on the ground within ForeFlight if you've packed for your flight in ForeFlight and have that information saved. But in this case, we can get it from the Unicom when we speak to Montreal La Macase Airport. So if the temperature is below 0, which today it is, we want to apply a temperature compensation to these, the following here. And that's listed right in the CapGen. So you can see where I have it underlined. So the published minimum IFR altitudes, so the MSA, TAA, and the initial / intermediate / final missed approach segments, including the MDA, DA, they must be adjusted when the ambient temperature on the surface is much lower than that predicted by the standard atmosphere. So as a general rule, this is considered to be 0 degrees Celsius. So you can read more on that in the CapGen. All right, next we are going to brief the approach and brief the airport diagram. In this case, we don't have a instrument arrival, so we're not going to brief that, but there's a lot of information that we can brief on the approach and on the airport diagram. And I like to highlight the different sections. You can use ForeFlight's annotation feature to highlight and add notes as you need to when you go through the briefing. Okay, so now we're getting closer to Montreal Airport, and we receive the following clearance. So here, Lima Romeo Quebec, you are cleared for the RNAV runway 20 via Debeb at La Macase. So it's at this point, once we're cleared for the approach, that I'm going to load the approach in ForeFlight. And let's take a look at how that would look. So I'm going to start by tapping the procedure button, then tap approach, then tap on the RNAV runway 20 via Debeb, and category A aircraft selected. I'm going to tap my LPV, minimums there, and then tap on add to route. And there, so it's loaded the approach via Debeb and put the approach procedure right on the map. And so the next thing is, since I'm cleared via Debeb, I'm going to tap on the approach waypoint in the route at the top and then select a direct to. So now I've loaded the approach and I've selected a direct to Debeb. All right, so let's say we get a route change. So ATC calls us up and says, Lima Romeo Quebec, we were just informed that there's FOD on the runway that needs to be cleared. So your approach clearance is canceled. Please continue direct to the airport for the time being. So things always come up as you're flying, right? And things change. So you may need to do a last minute route change. And in this case, we've loaded an approach and been cleared for it, but then we're now no longer cleared for this approach. So there's a few different things that we can do. We can the ATC has said to proceed direct to the airport for the time being. So we could tap on the CYFJ airport icon there in the FPL menu at the top and select direct to and just go direct to the airport. But another option that we can do is we can step back to a previous routing. And sometimes this can be useful for changes made to our route where we want to go back to what we had. So I want to show you how to do that. So what you want to do is tap on the routes button. So at the top of the maps page. So you tap the routes and then make sure that you have recent selected. And this now shows you a list that's in chronological order of the previous route variations or iterations that you had set up. So this is a great way to just step back to a previous route quickly and efficiently and load that back up if there's a change. So if I look there at the first one, The first one, that's my current route that I just loaded. That's the direct to DebEb for the RNAV approach. And you can see if you read the VIA information, it says that there. The second one here, that's the route that I had just before that, which was my flight from Timmins to Mont Tremblant via YTS Resin with the approach. So that's my routing with the approach, but it does not include the direct to DebEb. And then the first or the last one here in the list, since it's chronological order, this is my original flight from Timmins to Mont Tremblant. So that is the one that I want to load. I just want to go back to the original, which was direct to the airport. So I'm going to tap on that and load it in ForeFlight. And this is what it looks like. So tap the routes button at the top, recents, and then tap on the lower one there. And it's just going to reload that original route that I had. So this can be a great tool when you're en route, just to step back. Now let's go back a step and just load the route that we had previously, or the original route. And that recent routes list is really handy to just kind of go back in time and select a previous version of a route. All right, so say we get another clearance now, and we hear Lima Romeo Quebec, you're cleared direct DebEb, descend and maintain 5,000 feet. So here we're cleared direct DebEb, but we're not cleared for the approach, I guess, at this point. So they just want us to kind of head in that direction, but they don't want to give us the approach clearance yet. So, okay, no problem. So what I would do in this case is tap hold on the route and just tap hold and move it just slightly. Because I know that the DebEb point is somewhere between me and the airport, and I want my route line to now go via that point, DebEb. So the best way I think to do that is tap hold and just drag the route line slightly, because what that's going to do is bring up this map sidebar, and it's going to show options for nearby waypoints. Here I've got the list, you can see, sorted by waypoints, just to make it a little bit easier to find DebEb. So quickly I can say, oh, okay, there's DebEb, so I want to go via DebEb, so I'm going to select that, and then it's going to plot the route now via DebEb. But the next thing is I want to go direct to. So I can either tap on DebEb right on the map, or tap on the waypoint bubble in the FPL menu and just select direct to, and then I get my route going direct to DebEb. And here's just a live view of kind of what that would look like. So tap and drag, select DebEb, tap on DebEb there on the map, and just hit direct to. So it's just a few taps, and you've accomplished what you needed to do. All right, so we can assume now that eventually we were cleared for the approach. I would have loaded the approach again, just the same way that I did initially, and we can fly that approach. Again, there's different preference for pilots and how they like to fly it. So here's a picture of flying it with a synthetic vision view on the top, and then the approach plate on the bottom. In track up, you can just fly it with the approach plate fully on the map or on the plates page. So there's a bunch of different options that you can set up that work for you to fly this approach. And then you're going to land, obviously, and ForeFlight has a few different options where you can select to have the airport diagram automatically come up when you land, and that's found under the More settings auto show taxi feature. So you can either have it show the taxi diagram on the plates page like this, or have it show it right on the map. All right, so we completed the flight, and let's look at a couple of post-flight items. So first of all, I recorded a track log of my flight. It's always nice to be able to look back on the flight, and ForeFlight provides some great features for recording your track log of your flight, and you can either set ForeFlight up to do that automatically, and that's under More settings, auto track log recording. You can set that to the auto start stop on. That's the setting, and ForeFlight will automatically start recording your track log and automatically stop it as long as the criteria for that are met. So as long as you're departing from an airport and ForeFlight is open on the screen, you need to have ForeFlight on to recognize that takeoff and recognize the landing. And you need to have good GPS accuracy so that ForeFlight can recognize that you're taking off and going past a certain speed, and then also landing and slowing by a certain speed. But that in the flights I've done with this, it's worked really well, and you can automatically record your track log and then view the information here. You can also view your track log in 3D. So with ForeFlight Performance Plus, you get all the 3D features, so you can take a look at your track log in 3D by tapping the 3D button. And here's just a view of that approach into Montreal. It's kind of a cool approach for runway 20 as it comes over the lake, and then you'll get into the airport there. So it's a nice way to kind of review how your procedures are looking, and any changes en route, you can kind of look back on them and kind of really debrief the flight that way. All right, I also have it set for my track log to create a draft logbook entry in ForeFlight. So this is an option that you can select under more logbook settings. Is you can have draft. You can have track logs create draft logbook entries. So this is a great way to create your logbook entry kind of automatically, or at least the starting point for your logbook entry. It's still a draft, so I'm still going to go through this and make sure the information is correct and make any little adjustments that I need to. And then once everything looks good, I'm going to tap the approve button, and then that draft entry becomes an actual logbook entry in my ForeFlight logbook. And don't forget to always reference the CapGen, the AIM, the CFS, and the CARS. And again, you can find these 3 documents on the documents page in ForeFlight under the Nav Canada drive. And of course, if you have any ForeFlight questions, please don't hesitate to send an email to team@foreflight.com. We're on frequency 7 days a week, real pilots, and we're here ready to help. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. And thanks again for joining. Fly safe. And here's a picture of the last time I was at Montreal, La Macasa Airport. Nice snowy day, and I love how the airport building is this beautiful log cabin. All right, so without further ado, let's get into some Q&A. I'm also joined by my colleague and fellow Canadian pilot, Dominic. So thanks for joining me today, Dom.
Yeah, not a problem.
And let's let me get into the first one here. So first question I'll start with was at Jepson charts. I'm not seeing the MSA listed on the Jepson charts, as where I do see it on the Nav Canada charts in the corners. So yeah, that's a great question, and this is a good example too of a difference between just the style and the layout of the Jepson approach procedures versus the Nav Canada ones. So in Nav Canada approaches, you'll see that there's the MSA and like the corners of the approach view. So it'll show 4 separate boxes that have the MSA information, whereas on the Jepson procedures, it's just in the top bar. So it's in a single spot, it's not separated. And if there's a difference between or a different MSA based on the area that you're coming from, Jepson will split that up as well, just in the same spot, but it'll intersect the circle to show that there's the different altitudes there. So
we got a question as well with regards to the recommended routing in ForeFlight, and when you select a departure and destination airport and you select the route advisor, you get a list of recommended routes, preferred routes, recently ATC cleared routes. And we had a question regarding if those things include the CFS recommended routes. So in the back of the CFS, you'll see that there's a whole bunch of airports, departure and destinations listed, and depending on if you're departing east, west, north, or south from that airport, it'll actually give you a list of recommended routing from and to certain parts of the airport and the airspace. So does the ForeFlight route advisor take that into account? And the short answer is yes. And the reason I say yes is because at some point that route will be listed in there, but it may not necessarily be what ATC has been clearing the aircraft. And depending on your aircraft type as well, that route might only be valid for high aircraft or low aircraft, depending on how high you're going, turboprop, jet, things like that. So what the route advisor really does well is it takes the recently ATC cleared routes and it'll tell you when it was cleared and how many times. So you can get a really good idea of what ATC has been giving pilots. And that's the one I recommend you use, is the ATC cleared routes, because that'll be the most current example of the routing between your 2 points. I find that the CFS routes are often kind of outdated because it doesn't really reflect on what's going on in that airspace at any given time. And if ATC is rerouting pilots due to something going on or heavy traffic on a particular route, you won't really see that just using the CFS routing. So yeah, I always just advise taking a look at the route advisor and seeing what pilots are being cleared.
All right, I'll jump in with another one here. So another question that we got was, I only have the Canadian government charts and the level of service is not listed there. Where do I find that for Timmins? So we were talking about runway level of service and we were looking at that on the Jepson charts. And I find that it is a little bit more pronounced where that's listed at the bottom of the Jepson charts for the runway level of service or the visibility for the runway. And for Timmins, just bring that one up again, that is listed with the departure information. So as I'm bringing up the chart here for Timmins, the airport diagram, you can see that there's listed the departure procedures. So I can see for runway 03, there's a half mile. So that's the minimums there for the runway. Runway 10 half mile as well. Runway 2110, or sorry, half a mile. So it's half a mile across the board. So that's where that's listed. Sometimes with other airports, like I know flying out of YTZ, Toronto City, you'll have to find that on the departure procedures on a separate page. So you can find that one for Billy Bishop if you go to that one and go procedure, and then it's under the departure, and this is the Nav Canada published departure procedures for that one. And I'm just looking for the you want to look for the departure procedures. There it is. And it's its own page. So some airports, they do have the departure procedure information right on the airport diagram, like with Timmins. And so for other airports like Billy Bishop, they have the departure procedure as its own page. And again, though, you'll see the runways listed with the visibility or level of service there right after it.
Another question we had was when Adrian was demonstrating the icing and clouds view in the profile view, some of you may not have seen that. That's because the icing, turbulence, and cloud layers in profile view specifically are a Performance Plus feature. So if you're not a Performance Plus subscriber, you won't see that in the actual profile view. But you are able to see the layers on the maps page if you are just a Pro Plus subscriber. And those details are all listed on our website as well. So if you want to take a look at what weather features you will or won't see, you can take a look at them there. So someone asked, if you are using only a GNSS approach, the alternate has to be 100 miles away, and that seems bizarre. You're right, it does seem bizarre, but it's only under the circumstance when you're using a satellite-based approach for both your destination and your alternate. So there's no nav-aid-based approaches. In that case, yes, the airports have to be separated by at least 75 miles, where both airports are in Nunavut or north of the 56th degree latitude in Quebec or Labrador. Otherwise, they have to be 100 miles apart anywhere else in Canada. And this is really just to account for any satellite outages you may have in that region, because if you have a satellite outage, it's going to affect a wide region. And just to mitigate that risk, that's why both airports have to be so far apart. So yeah, just wanted to address that one.
That's a good question. It is an interesting rule for sure. All right. Well, I think that's all we've got for today. So if you have any more questions, as we mentioned, don't hesitate to send in an email to team@foreflight.com, and we'll get right back to you. And thanks again for joining. And we hope to look forward to seeing you in the next webinar.
Thanks, Adrian. See ya.